Is the federal government fans of the NHL Trade Deadline? Talking about the Canadian federal government. Hi there, it's Brett Hornby here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Saw an interesting story recently that apparently the league and the federal government are working on a deal that ahead of the National Hockey League Trade Deadline, which will be on Monday, April the 12th in 2021, that normally, especially still dealing with the global pandemic with COVID-19, it's the Quarantine Act, where if you are entering into Canada from the US or any other spot in the internationally, that you must quarantine for 14 days. And that actually included NHL players. As we knew earlier this season, when the Winnipeg Jets and the Columbus Blue Jackets made a big trade where Patrik Lanie and Pierre-Luc Dubois got traded, and with the fact that Patrik Lanie was in Canada and Pierre-Luc Dubois was in Columbus, that they each had to wait 2 weeks. Well, I know that Patrik Lanie was injured, but Pierre-Luc Dubois, being in Columbus, he had to wait 2 weeks before he was cleared to play with the Winnipeg Jets after he got traded. That would definitely skew the trade deadline when it comes to the Canadian teams. And there has been more waiver claims where I've noticed that, for example, the Toronto Maple Leafs had a few players that they put on waivers that the Vancouver Canucks picked up. But the federal government and the National Hockey League pulled the story that I found on the Athletic that they're looking at reducing that quarantine time from 14 days to 7 days. It says in the headline, Canada to reduce quarantine period to 7 days for traded NHL players. As it mentions, the Canadian government is expected to approve a 7-day quarantine period for NHL players who are dealt from US-based teams to a club in Canada ahead of the April 12th deadline, and there's been many reports talking about it. The quarantine period will also include additional testing, the report said, under the current rules, as it applies to everyone. Anyone entering Canada is required to quarantine for at least 14 days, regardless if you're a National Hockey League player or just Joe Schmo like me. That's one of the reasons why you haven't been able to, wise to not travel, and the international borders in Canada and US has been closed to non-essential travel for over a year now, and that can has at least been kicked down the road until April 21st. Basically, as you approach the 21st, that can gets kicked down the road for another month. That's basically everything. So that's the gist of it, so that there would be less time for players to be quarantined, because the Quarantine Act doesn't work as much if, let's say, you're going to the US from Canada. But that's also one of the reasons why they've divisionalized the teams, and I have been loving this all-Canadian division, North all-Canadian division as a Calgary Flames fan, even though I'm going to say competition-wise probably has hurt the Flames' chances a lot more for success again in the playoffs as opposed to if we played in the traditional Pacific Division. But it's just been exciting, and it's just, to limit travel, and that's why that division was made. But could this potentially open up the trade deadline? I still think the trade deadline this season in the National Hockey League isn't going to be as busy compared to previous trade deadlines, not only because of the quarantine and the travel restrictions, but the salary cap is still flat, and it's going to likely be flat at $81.5 million for the next few seasons, as revenues has definitely taken a hit. With, no fans in attendance, although there is some markets where some fans have been allowed in, where they sit up in the upper sections, where the lower bowl is still closed off, and they still have no bench, no glass behind the benches to try to improve airflow. And yeah, I think it's partially mitigated that, but there has been still players testing positive, and actually for the first time going back to the North All-Canadian Division, the Montreal Canadiens actually have gotten hit with COVID protocol where they had some games postponed most recently with the Edmonton Oilers. But I think this may offer up more potential activity. I mean, the idea is if you make a trade with a team, you hope to get that player right away. Well, you get it right away if a Canadian team traded with another Canadian team, but could that be a lot trickier because of the interdivisional play under these unique circumstances? But could this open up more trades because of it? I mean, it depends on where you are in the schedule. Even if the player is still injured, that buying time for the quarantine would play in. But that's the first part. The second part is, as a Calgary Flames fan, is my expectations on how I think the Flames are going to treat the trade deadline. And I am slowly thinking the Calgary Flames are going to be sellers at the trade deadline and not buyers. And I think, with this team being inconsistent all season, and a few weeks ago we made the biggest news of the season where we decided to move on from Jeff Ward and bring back Daryl Sutter. And yes, I was shocked. And at the time that the Calgary Flames did that. But I have noticed since when Daryl Sutter has taken over the bench, as expected, Calgary was going to be playing a lot more defensive style. And our defensive play has improved. However, our offense has dried up and we are still struggling against the Ottawa Senators. And if you look at the standings, while we're not totally out of it, we got to get realistic as well. And maybe, although it's unfortunate for the case of the Montreal Canadiens, and I think that's the only team that I think the Calgary Flames could realistically catch if we were to make the playoffs in the North All-Canadian Division to be in the top four. Even though Toronto has slipped a bit, I still like Toronto and definitely Winnipeg and Edmonton. I think those are the three teams that I would say are most likely to make the playoffs in the North All-Canadian Division. Then it comes down to Montreal and Calgary, but I almost think it might be wise still for the Calgary Flames to be sellers because we have been keep changing coaches, but yet the core has remained. And I did say, if you go back to my Daryl Sutter being hired video, that I say one or two things are going to happen. Either the core is going to get changed or the core is going to be changed. And I might think it could be wise that the core might need to get changed. Maybe sell. And then plus you got to factor in the Seattle Kraken expansion draft. And maybe I'll touch on a video later after the trade deadline on who I think the Calgary Flames are ultimately going to protect and expose in the expansion draft ahead for the Seattle Kraken. And there is still some interesting decisions to make. And it all depends on, performance and where the Flames are at. And, if any trades are made. And you almost got to wonder that now that we solidified ourselves with Daryl Sutter as head coach, could there be a possibility that maybe the Calgary Flames could be looking at maybe some other management changes? Because Calgary has been, up and down all season, this season, and then just in recent years where, 2013 was definitely the season where Calgary really said it was time to blow it up and start a rebuild. Because after the 2009 season and going in 2010 to 2012, 2013, the worst spot you can be in, especially in the salary cap world, is be in the middle of mediocrity, where you just missed the playoffs by a few points and you're thinking, well, if we could just add one more piece, we can contend, or do we blow it up? And that was the spot that the Calgary Flames were in then, and it's starting to remind me we're in that spot right now. But we have a younger core, and that's been the constant the whole time. I think if looking back, after the 2013 season when we traded away, Jerome McGinley and Jay Bomeister and really started to embrace the rebuild. 2014 we were still a fun team to watch despite working hard, and then you could probably say maybe we overachieved in 2015 where we made the playoffs and got into the second round of the playoffs because we had a favorable matchup with the Vancouver Canucks, but we missed in 2016. Made it in 2017, but that was because Calgary had to win 10 games in a row to down the stretch to only get swept by the Ducks, and then we missed in 2018, and then kept the coaching carousel going on, and then 2019, we definitely probably say we overachieved, where we looked like Stanley Cup contenders at one point, and then we didn't make it out of the first round. And then last season, you can kind of say it was very weird for many reasons. Well, unforeseen circumstances as a coach, and then the shutdown. But then Calgary looked good at points, did enough to get into the official first round, but then couldn't finish off the deal with Dallas, a team that eventually went to the finals. And then now this season, it's looking like we're likely not going to make the playoffs, and I think it might be time to look at maybe potentially selling and trying to factor in the expansion draft ahead. But I have to say, what do you think of both, the Canadian government agreeing to but reduce the quarantine time from 14 days to 7 days for, let's say, if it's someone from an American-based team get traded to Canada? Could that potentially spawn on some more trade deadline activity? I'm not expecting a record-breaking trade deadline, and also with the still uncertainty and still figuring out the entry draft. Well, in terms of scouting players or any junior players playing, I mean, the WHL has just been starting, and the Quebec-based Junior Hockey League has started and stopped, and I don't think I've heard anything about the Ontario Hockey League playing. That any draft picks that are going to get drafted, or traded, I should say, you might see some more 2021 picks being traded away because of the uncertainty, or maybe someone would think someone that you could draft maybe in the second round, who you think might likely still be around in the sixth round, but it might be a lot of those trades. But it's the flat cap. And that's about the quarantine part. But as a Calgary Flames fan, do you think we're going to be more selling than buying at this stage? I don't think we can really stand pat anymore. We've been changing coaches, but not so much with the players. And there are some players that are also showing signs that they're declining and trying to maximize an asset. And I almost think it might be best to maybe look at making decisions there if you can, obviously with the flat cap, and not too sure what the draft class is going to be for this season. How much shopping around could the Calgary Flames do? So that's all I have for this video on that story, and just throwing in what I think the Calgary Flames are likely going to do at the trade deadline, which will be on Monday, April the 12th. I don't think it's going to be as exciting, as intriguing as in previous years, just because of given the current circumstances. But I think maybe there might be a few more trades that could happen with the quarantine period reduced from 14 to 7 days. So anyways, like I say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home of the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, but I do a variety of non-sports content like personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experiences with them on the road. We're at a sport event, so if it all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, you know what you need to do. Just make sure you subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below. So I'm going to say go Flames go, and pretty soon there'll be another My Calgary Flames in 6 game recap coming up, and once I get through that, you'll have an idea why I think the Calgary Flames are likely lean towards being a seller as opposed to a buyer. It's not going to be hard either way. We're not like the Buffalo Sabres, where they really, really are going to be selling everything, even maybe Rick Jeanneret. Who knows? But not that much to the Calgary Flames, not like 2013, that much selling, but it might be time to consider that, looking at how the season has been going. So I just want to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.